The Drink Beer, Think Beer podcast is sponsored by Beer Edge. I'm Andy Crouch, the co-founder of Beer Edge, along with my partner and your podcast host, John Hall. John and I work hard to bring you fresh and insightful content related to the ever-changing world of craft beer. We're passionate about beer and independent journalism. If you're interested in supporting Beer Edge, visit our website, beeredge.com, which is updated regularly with new content, interviews, and articles. Please also consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your episodes. You can also subscribe to the Beer Edge newsletter on our website. Is there anyone you think that we should be talking to? Please drop us a line at andy@beeredge.com with your thoughts. And as always, thanks for your support.
Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and have you found the Facebook group for This Week in Rauch Beer? It's there, and every day we're talking about smoky beer delights. Search the site and ask to join. We'll be sure to let you in. But let's talk about hops this week, especially fresh hops, and I'm excited to have Zach Beckwith, the head brewer at Brewing Company in Oregon. He's got some thoughts on the style, and we'll dive into all of it shortly. But first, a reminder that this show is produced by Beer Edge. Check out beeredge.com for articles, to sign up for the newsletter, and for other podcasts, including one hosted by Andy Crouch. We're also on social media, so find us on all the good sites at The Beer Edge. I had such great plans for 2020. I turned 40 in January, and I was planning on traveling to Oktoberfest for the first time with some friends. We were, of course, going to stop in Bamberg as well. And I was going to head west to Oregon for fresh hop season. Over the last few weeks, hops have been harvested throughout the Pacific Northwest in a ritual that usually brings thousands of brewers from around the country and the world into the field, into the sampling rooms, and into meetings with growers. I was more interested in visiting the bars and breweries. For years now, my friend, the great writer Jeff Allworth, has been urging me to come to Portland, Oregon for a few days in late September. It's when many of the local breweries have put fresh hop beers on offer. These are usually draft only and one-offs, and when they're gone, they're gone. The commercial versions that make it to the East Coast where I am might have some of the vibrancy and aroma and flavor that we expect, but Allworth argues, correctly I assume, that something is still lost in the transport and the location where you're drinking it. COVID-19 messed up both Oktoberfest and hop harvest travel, but we should still be thinking about it and getting ready for the better times. And so I reached out to Allworth and asked him to suggest someone for the show that had deep thoughts on fresh hops. He immediately suggested Zach Beckwith of Brewing Company. In fact, Allworth told me, Zach had just penned an email that would soon become a column on the Beervana blog. That went up last week, the same day I spoke with Zach on the phone from the brewery. What's in a name, what's being done right, and what could be done better? And are any of us even thinking of these beers the right way? Zach has thoughts. Here's our conversation. What is this time of year typically like for you as a brewer?
It's kind of a crazy time of year because the brewing fresh hop beers is dependent on the hop harvest. So we have to leave holes in our schedule or leave a tank empty because the harvest dates for a specific variety can shift almost daily. So typically I'll start talking with the growers that I've dealt with for last few years or that I'm looking for to get a specific variety. I'll talk with them starting in kind of late July, just to get a feel for it, to kind of get on their radar. And then about mid-August, they will have some preliminary dates typically for me around when they expect to start harvesting varieties. And usually that's more of like a week window. And so I can kind of plan.
Week as in 7 days, or week as in not that strong?
No, as in 7 days.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I guess basically not that strong either, because they usually shift anywhere from another 4 to 5 days in any direction. But so what what happens then is I start to plan out my schedule, and I'm usually with my brew schedule, I'm about 6 weeks out anyways. So I can kind of see where I'm going to have open tanks and where I can move things around. But then it gets really tricky. Our brewery, we use a mobile packaging company. So we do can 2 different versions of one of our fresh hop beers called Fresh Trop. And so with that, it's even more challenging because I basically have to schedule a canning run every week because I don't know when I'm going to have the beer. So it's kind of twofold on that end. But once harvest starts, which is typically around the third week in August,
Right.
and it's usually Centennial is typically the first variety that's coming off in the Northwest here. So that's why by now you're starting to see some more varieties, but the first wave of fresh hop beers is always Centennial beers around here, just because that's the first hop that's harvested. So once harvest begins, then again the growers are looking on their fields. They're testing for oil content, moisture content. Some of the brand specific or proprietary varieties, the major brokers will give them kind of deadlines to have a certain variety picked by, so that guides some of their kind of decisions as well about where they're in the field. This year with the wildfires, we've had more of a challenge because a lot of the farms had to shut down in the middle of harvest because of smoke and because they lost power or they had the power cut, so there wouldn't be more fires.
Yeah.
So it's just it's a logistical nightmare for everyone, really, because once harvest begins, they don't stop. They run 24 hours a day. So sometimes that window is small enough where they're only picking a specific variety for 8 hours, 8 or 12 hours, and then they're on to something else or out of that field or moved on. So you kind of just really have to be ready to drop the hat at a moment's notice. Where we're over in Central Oregon, so it's about a 3-hour drive from here to the hop fields, and so that's 3 hours there, 3 hours back. So when it comes to time for brew day for us, basically you time it out where you're looking about how long our brew day is, and we try and time it so whoever's driving over to pick up the hops gets back within. We usually leave about a half hour wiggle room until we're ready to add them on the hot side. So
Wow.
so yeah, they're basically from field to before beer's hitting them about 4 hours. And so that's another logistical problem. What we actually started doing last year is kind of the light bulb went off is we used to leave at 5 a.m, drive over there so we could be back. We do typically double batches at our production brewery.
How big a system is that?
It's a 15 barrel.
Okay.
So we'll do a 30 barrel batch essentially. Sure. And so typically what we were doing was someone was leaving at the crack of dawn to get over there to have the hops back for the first batch. But then I realized the hops for the second batch then have already kind of started to degrade because they've just been sitting in our cooler for that extra couple hours. So
Sure.
What we did last year is now, and what we've done is we time it so the hops are there for the second batch, and we throw all the fresh hops into the second batch of beer. So we basically double up on the fresh hops that we've done. So with our fresh Trop, we just brewed the second one yesterday, actually, with some Mosaic from Coleman Ag, and so we had over 380 pounds in 15 barrels. So it was it's quite a lot. It's really cool because and obviously I don't know if you've ever experienced a fresh hop brew day, but it's a lot of work because it's all hands on deck. And but what's really cool is you actually get like a lupulin sheen, there's so much oils that you're extracting that it's like a slick on top of the wort from it, which is pretty interesting to see. I've even seen you'll have like just lupulin in some of the manometers on the brew house or whatever will be just like thick with like a yellow lupulin stuck in there too. And the brewery then smells amazing for 2 days afterwards.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of romance involved in this, because otherwise it seems like it's just, I don't know, a lot of work, and a lot of headaches and a lot of worry about things that potentially go wrong. And as beers become more streamlined and processes have been dialed in, and breweries take great pride in sort of having an efficient process, something like this really seems to sort of throw a monkey wrench into the works. So I'm curious as to what's the appeal for you as a brewer, to have these couple of weeks of what sounds like chaos.
It is chaotic, and but if you look at it from this way too, the summer season is peak season for every brewery. I mean, in Bend, we're a touristy town, so it's really crazy for us through the season. And so you typically brewers by nature are kind of a creative bunch, and we strive to be, we love creating new beers. And so when you get kind of in this peak summer and you're slogging through brewing the same couple IPAs just to keep up all the time, you can kind of lose sight of that. And so for me, always fresh hop season is kind of this light at the end of the tunnel somewhere, where when you drive, I typically will try and make at least one trip over to pick up the hops. And it's just kind of this magic when you get out of the van and you're surrounded by hop fields, and just this overwhelming aroma just gets in everything, and you have that relationship with the growers and are able to kind of have that direct connection to what's going into your beer. It just kind of allows you to have this kind of aha moment. It's like, yeah, that's why I do this. Like, this is why I love it. It just reaffirms kind of that passion, at least for me. And then at the end of the day, the beers are just phenomenal too. If you have and as you said, you've never truly experienced a fresh hop beer.
So before we started recording, I was mentioning that Jeff Allworth and I have had this conversation where, he likes to chide me on my, I guess, my distance from Oregon, and that I don't get to drink a lot of the truly spectacular beers that are being made, because you have to drink them when they're made, or they're only coming from small places. And I think there's a notion of what fresh hop beers are, and most beer drinkers, and even especially IPA drinkers, get excited about this time of year, but it really is a local product, right? I mean, it's some of the larger breweries that are packaging them and sending them across the country or whatever. It's just not the same.
Yeah, absolutely. It's truly something that I always liken it to, and I've used this analogy a lot. I mean, there's a big difference between us having that direct relationship with the grower that I talked about, of having that ongoing dialogue through the harvest, and then going and bringing them some beer, and loading up hops, and having this direct connection to a brewery in Florida that has a relationship with their UPS driver that rolls up. It's just a different level. And what you get is, as you said, it's a purely local, and probably the last truly local style that can only be made at one time a year in one place, which is the Northwest, in my opinion, because this is where we have.
I don't know. There might be places in Michigan and Vermont and some other states that might disagree with you.
Yeah, they might, but
are they wrong?
I mean, I know that there's a lot of acres there. I actually grew up in Michigan, so in cherry country up north there, that I know that they've actually got a good amount of hop acreage there. But I think that the infrastructure is still lacking there, and what you don't have are these growers like we have in the Willamette Valley that are fourth generation growers. I mean, growing hops is all they've ever known, and so that's a little bit of the difference too. And I think that there's a lot of research being done on hop terroir, and I think that that's something that is if you want something that's specific. And I mean, the Cascade that they're growing in northern Michigan or in Vermont is different than what you would think of as Cascade that's grown in, the Willamette Valley or in Yakima. So I wouldn't say that they're wrong, and you can do that, but the difference is there may be one brewery and it's more of a novelty, I think, there than it is here. It's a pure cultural phenomenon. If you're in the Northwest in mid-September to mid-October, it is fresh hop season. That's what it is. Everyone
and that's what
waits
you
for
drink.
it.
Yeah.
And that's what you drink. If you go to a bar, and we were at another brewery on Monday, me and the rest of our brewers, and they had a fresh hop beer on, so that's what we had. And then typically I won't drink the same beer twice. I'll try something else, but I had another fresh hop because that's just what you do, because the beers are here and then they're gone. Jeff focuses a lot on the kind of evanescence of this fresh hop character, and that's what kind of him and I have been debating a little bit. Is I look at it more as just this saturation you get from a fresh hop beer is what I'm looking for, that really you can only find at this time of year. You're not getting this, and it's not that they don't last very long or that flavor disappears. It just changes different. It changes differently, if that makes any sense. Is you kind of have this evolution of flavor that isn't what you get from a typical beer. That is, it kind of goes up and down, and so on a daily basis it can change, but it's always unique. And then you kind of lock in this everlasting just saturation of hop character.
So let's sort of unpack this a little bit, because this is where I think my distance from the Pacific Northwest starts to come into play, because my idea of a fresh hop beer is, it has a vibrancy to it. It has a little bit of a pungency to it. You're getting a hop kick. But aside from that, I don't necessarily quite know how to describe it. And when we think about, West Coast IPA, or we think about the New England style, or, black IPA, Cascadian Dark, whatever we're calling that, there's different hallmarks to the different styles of beers. And we expect, something to at least taste in the wheelhouse of what we know these definitions to be. What should a fresh hop beer have hallmarks? Should there be, I don't know, defining qualities to it? And if so, like what are they?
I think that's a really tough question, because it comes down to that idea of I think that everyone struggles to lock down what these hallmarks flavors are of fresh hop beers. It's something where I think that you have to, and maybe to what Jeff's point was about you not having experienced it, is that it may not be something you can recognize in isolation, that you need to try 5 or 6 different fresh hop beers at a time to kind of pinpoint this flavor, or this kind of, I don't even know if you can call it a flavor. It's more of just a sensation. And I think that everyone struggles to define what that is. I don't know. Typically the terminology people will use will be like green or chlorophyll-like, but
sure,
it can be more than that, and some elements of that. But for example, just a quick anecdote was I had submitted a fresh hop beer a number of years ago to the GABF, because they have
the
a
Great American
fresh
Beer
hop
Festival.
category. Yeah. And
that's right. They did that one year. I forgot about that.
And I think they still do, but it's kind of turned into more just another IPA category.
Okay.
But I could tell when we got our judge notes back, the judges didn't know what fresh hop beers were, because you got all kinds of typical beer descriptors that they were searching around for a way to describe this flavor. And so some said it came off as vegetal, or it could come off as maybe DMS, or maybe this. There wasn't a lot of certainty to it, and it was kind of like, well, it doesn't seem like they really understand what that fresh hop character is, and I honestly don't know if I can describe what
Well,
it
that
is.
was I was going to ask you. Yeah. Well, I mean, but you make these beers, so how do you? And you know, you build a season around it. So, what is a winner for you in your mind, for your palate, and you know, how do you know when it's ready? Or actually, let me back that up, because I'm getting ahead of myself there. So when you're thinking about a recipe and you're thinking about making a fresh hop beer, where do you start? What are the building blocks?
Well, I mean, as with everything, is we look at making a complete beer, and so with that, obviously, with any beer, I start with a good malt balance, and so I'm maybe unique in that I look at kind of what malt is going into my IPAs or my hop forward beers as much as I do what the hops are, because that's what makes it a cohesive unit. So we would look at basically building a pale ale or an IPA recipe. We've done some fresh hop reds before that have been really nice as well. And so you start there, and then you look at what variety you want to use. And that's the thing with fresh hops too, is you can't rely on the character of the fresh hop to be the same as you would with a pellet or a dried whole leaf of the same variety. So that throws into it a whole nother kind of X factor, is that the variety specificity just isn't, it's not exact, and you get a different character. So though you might want to look at Citra and be like, oh, that would be a great fresh hop, it may not necessarily be, because it's not going to come through in that classic Citra way. It's going to have a different element to it. And again, I wish I could describe it better than different, but it's really, really difficult, because it's just this, it's more of a sensation, as I said before, than it is kind of a typical flavor component. And so, you know, one of the best fresh hop varieties out there is Crystal. And no one, it's maybe the least sexy hop.
I was going to say that's not necessarily something that brewers like to to showcase. I don't remember the last time I walked into a brewery where it's like, hey, check out my Crystal hopped IPA. Yeah.
Yeah. So and with that, you get such unique character, and really that element of terroir comes into play too.
So like, what kind of unique character? Like, what do you get off of it?
It's a ripeness, like a ripe fruit, but not in that like juicy sense. And then you've got a hint of like an herbal character. But just think of these flavors as the subtlety is not there. It's ratcheted up. And so I think that's an important point too, is that fresh hop beers are made to be intense, and that doesn't mean intense bitterness. But typically with ours, as we're tasting it in the fermenter during fermentation, you've got this like spicy bitterness that is just unique, and that's how you kind of can tell it's in the right direction. It's this I guess spicy is the best way to describe it. Like not like a black pepper spice, but more of like a kind of a almost like a coriander kind of spice to it, where it's got some sweet elements, but also some like heat herbal elements as well.
You've been using the term fresh hop. I know a lot of folks also use wet hop at this time of year. Do you have you clearly have a preference as to the word that you use.
Do you? Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been. This was my 11th harvest, so I brewed probably over 40 different fresh hop beers. In Oregon, we call them all the festivals are fresh hop festivals. Some of the earliest fresh hop beers brewed in the region were called fresh hop beers. I just think it's a better descriptor, and it's the proper one. I think that not to be controversial, but
No, go for it.
yeah,
That's what this show's all about.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think wet hop is just it sounds kind of gross, and I don't think it really gives you a clue of what it is. Though what I've seen in the last few years, and this may be unintentional, it seems like a lot of brewers in Washington State like to call their beers wet hop beers. So it could be just a slight state by state difference, but also I think what I've seen is that brewers that are using fresh hops in a conditioning tank, as you would like as almost like a dry hop phase, are you maybe using the term wet hop in place of dry hop? I've kind of seen that seem kind of
Boy, that's
come
not
about.
at all confusing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But as opposed to like with the fresh hop beers that we make, it's all on the hot side.
Okay.
So it's more akin to like using them in a big hop back.
So let's talk about
usually,
let's talk about process, because there are so many different ways that you can use these fresh hops once they arrive, and in order to extract the flavors that you want and have them do what you want. I know you've done different things over the years. What do you find works best for the beers that you want to make?
So as I was kind of just alluding
Sure.
to,
Yeah. Sorry, I was just trying to
them,
set you up a little bit better there. I
yeah,
didn't mean to
no, it's
interrupt
great.
you.
Is we use all ours on the hot side, which means that basically we brew a beer as normal. We'll run it into our whirlpool as we normally would, and then we'll basically during that process while we're boiling, we'll scoop out all the grain out of our mash tun as we do normally, but then scrub the screens, give the mash tun a kind of a really good hand clean, and then we add all the fresh hops back into that. Typically, we use 100% pellets in all our beers, so we're not set up to use whole leaf hops at all. Some breweries that use whole leaf will have a hop back, and they can utilize that. We don't have that option, so we have to basically repurpose our mash tun into a giant hop back. And so then
cool.
we'll hook up a separate hose and run all the beer. So what we'll do is we'll take out the spray ball in our mash tun, and so we'll just pump the wort from the whirlpool over through where the spray ball would be typically, but just straight down into the hops. And then at the same time, we have someone up there that's basically essentially mashing in with hops. So you've got your mash paddle and you're stirring all the hops, trying to get as much contact on them as you can. And then we'll take our grain out rake that we've cleaned and do some punch downs, almost like you would in a winery, with them to just kind of get every bit we can squeezed out of it.
Yeah.
When I first, this is kind of a funny story, is when I first started making fresh hop beers, I worked at a little brewery that's now gone called New Old Lompoc in Northwest Portland. And we had this old dairy rectangular mash tun that had one giant screen that you took out. So when we brew fresh hop beers there, I'd take out the big screen, fill the mash tun with fresh hops, and then put the screen back in, and almost like a French press, press it down to just, and I called it jokingly the patented Lompoc hop press, because we would essentially, just squeeze as much out as we could of it. And I think that, and then from there, once you've kind of run all the wort onto the hops, then we start knocking out back through the heat exchanger into our fermenter pretty quickly after that. So, they're getting hit. We tried this year for the first time. There's been a lot of breweries They're experimenting with cooling their wort on the way to the whirlpool before they add their whirlpool hops to it. Then the theory is that you're getting more juicy character out of some of those new school varieties.
Sure.
So we tried that with one of our fresh hop beers today, or this year, and I don't think we really saw much of a difference from cooling it down to 180 is when it's running in there at 200. It was kind of a little more work and for a little payoff. But that's the thing with fresh hop beers too, is as I'm describing this process to you, it's pretty fresh because we just brewed one yesterday. But it's something, because you only brew these beers a couple times a year at the same time, that it's a whole year. You kind of got to relearn it every year. I always think that we should take pictures, and then when you get in the chaos, you kind of forget. And then it's like, oh yeah, we did that last year. This worked better. So, some of it's like, well, instead of adding all the hops in, we will add half of them, and then as we're running the wort over, add the rest. So that way we're getting better coverage and making sure everything gets saturated. So it's little small tweaks like that it's really hard to gauge what difference they're making, because again, you only make them once a year, and then it's a whole year before. So you can't really judge against what you've done the previous year in some respects. So that, I think that, and the changing nature of the fresh hops from year to year kind of leads into what we were struggling to describe about this kind of fleeting flavor or indescribable sensation you get from fresh hop beers, is that it's something that where you see people that especially beer drinkers, they're comparing year to year, being like, oh, this one was great last year, but it's not that great this year. Or there's kind of that same excitement that we used to have before there's the seasonal beers basically became don't exist when they got taken over by one-off beers. Now you kind of, if you remember back in the day, everyone used to be like, oh, well, the Schutt's Jubile Ale was really good last year, but not as good this year. That's always the argument. It was always better last year,
yeah,
no matter what. And that's kind of with fresh hops too, is, it may have been better last year or not, or who knows? It could have been exactly the same, but
that's where it goes sort of beyond the glass of, it's situational as well. And because, it is such a fleeting lifespan, there's probably a little bit more excitement on behalf of the drinker, right? Of, knowing that this is probably the only moment of time that you'll be able to enjoy this sort of moment in time beer.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like almost the same idea as that fear of missing out as you get with, people standing in line for the latest hazy IPA release. It's that kind of that same thing of like, well, I gotta drink as many fresh hop beers as I can in this season, or it'll be a whole year before I get to try them again.
Yeah. It's not like pumpkin beers, which you can drink year round now. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it leads back into that kind of whole idea we were talking about it being just a cultural thing. And, going back to the farmers in Michigan and Vermont that are making fresh hop beers, I think that's great. But what you don't get is not every brewery is making fresh hop beers or multiples of them. And so you don't have this kind of cultural moment or cultural holiday around these beers that you get in the Northwest. And that's sort of something like, if you're a beer lover, doesn't matter where you are in the world, you really owe it to yourself to come to Oregon or come to Washington in mid-September, early October, and just experience it for yourself, because it's truly unlike anything you find anywhere else.
So the timing, I think, is important, because that's when the beers start to hit the draft lines and obviously some packaging as well. But in the same way that the hops start to degrade after they've been picked, so you want to get them into the brew house as quickly as possible. Do these beers, the ones that you're describing, do they change the longer they sit in a keg, the longer they've been in a can, from when you deem they're ready to release? Like, we obviously see degradation of, like normal IPAs. Is it more pronounced with fresh hop beers?
This is where I probably differ from a lot of people. Is that I feel that if you look at it, and hops traditionally until the last 20 years or so were pretty much used as a to balance the sweetness of the malt and for preservative qualities, and so historically. And so when those preservative qualities still exist in hops, and so when you're using these massive amounts, I mean, we're using 10 to 12 pounds per barrel of fresh hops. I like to say it is that you kind of have ups and downs when they're real fresh, but then you kind of hit a plateau. It doesn't just peak and then fall off quickly, in my opinion. I feel that, like, because you have so much of hop character in there, that it does tend to hang on for longer. It depends on the method, and that's just based on the hot side fresh hop additions that, like, we're doing. As we were talking about, some breweries that are putting finished beer in a bright tank on some fresh hops, those beers tend to have a more fleeting aroma, just the same way that the aromatics in a dry hopped IPA, that those kind of tend to fall off. But I think that that's also kind of a misnomer in some ways, because I don't think it necessarily falls off. I think that it changes, and that you should be open to something that's that volatile. Is, I don't know, you want some stability, because you want, even though these beers are changing like crazy, the fresh hop beers, and up and down, that eventually you want it to settle into some sort of consistent character, just as you would with any beer. That's why, as I said in the beginning, like, we're paying as much attention to the malt bill we're using. We use a small amount of pellet hops typically in our fresh hop beers too, because we want it to be a complete beer. We don't want it just to be where it's only good for a day and a half and then it's not a great beer anymore. And so what we found was that with some of our packaged fresh hop beers, that they actually hold that once they kind of go through that initial up and down volatile phase, that once they settle into kind of a groove, they hold up remarkably well. The oxidation seems to be lower, and I think, and the only thing that I can attribute that to is just that you're using such a mass amount of hop material, that you're getting that preservative quality just kind of helps it hang on longer. But that's, again, my theory, and I think that a lot of people would disagree with me that they need to be drank as quickly as possible. But I think that realistically, for a brewer, thinking that beer you put out is going to be drank within 2 days of packaging is just not a realistic scenario. So you want to ensure that beer is gonna taste great down the line, especially if you're putting these into a package. And this year more than ever, we're seeing more and more packaged fresh hop beers. It's the trend's been going up the last few years,
right? But COVID probably kickstarted that, or
exactly. Just because draft beer has been much more of a struggle. All breweries are moving more towards packaged beer at this moment. So
you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to sort of just come back to, of that if you're living in that part of the country, the fresh hop is pretty much all you're drinking. Do you see sales decline on your other beers during this time of year? Like, are the scales like totally
question.
tipped? Yeah.
I don't know if that's I don't think we make enough of volume of fresh hop beers to see that. I think that what you'll see typically with our fresh hop beers and with most breweries, they're making a big deal that you're tapping a fresh hop beer. So there's a bit of buzz that goes with that naturally. But then I think that we we have we usually don't have a ton, especially since we've been packaging our fresh drop the last 2 years. We only have a dozen so kegs for ourselves afterwards. So it goes on tap and goes away pretty quick. So I don't think that you see much of a dent that way, just because you may see a spike and you just sell all the fresh hop beer really quickly. But I don't think it really affects the other sales.
Okay.
Generally.
Okay.
If anything, we can rely on, especially with distribution or whatever, or no matter if they can't sell, a brown ale any time of the year, but that no matter what fresh hop beer, as soon as those magic words fresh hop go out, that every beer bar is going to want it, every store is going to want the can. So it's kind of like from the brewery side, it's an easy sell, and that the beer is going to be here and gone. So I think from that perspective, it doesn't make a big dent on like affecting our other sales. If anything, it's just an added bonus.
That makes sense. And then you also mentioned, the volume that you need as well, and obviously, because of the weight of it as well, of these whole cone and the fresh hop, you are buying more. What do you do if there's leftovers? Or do you do everything you can to just ensure that every last cone goes in?
Oh, so when we're talking to our growers, we'll tell them the amount that we want, and so we'll weigh out exactly what we're planning to use. If there's extra, then they just go in.
Okay.
It's one of the few times where you could say that actually more is better. Less, if you're not using enough fresh hops, then you're not gonna get that saturated character that I've struggled so mightily to describe. But if you're using a little bit more than you expected to, you're not going to really have an effect there. And part of the reason you're using so much more is, hops typically when you're using them, they've been kilned, so all the moisture is taken out of them. So a lot of that weight in the fresh hops is water weight.
Right.
So it's not, a pound of fresh hops is not equal to a pound of pellet hops.
Right.
It's, so that's the factor as well. And, for us, typically I'll always list for our fresh hop beers when I'm writing out our beer menus that for IBUs, I just put a question mark because the hops haven't been tested and there's no way to really calculate or quantify outside of a lab, and we're a small brewery that doesn't have those capabilities. So it's like that kind of misses the point too. Like, it's not 2005 and everyone's looking for 200 IBU beers anymore anyway. So it's something where you really have no ability to, at least on our scale, to measure what the IBU contribution of 380 pounds of fresh mosaic is.
Do people still ask about that though? I feel like nobody ever won the IBU wars. They just kind of, everybody lost.
We see more people that are asking for low IBU beers, which is great.
Sure.
I think that it's a statistic that I think most brewers and most beer people have kind of moved on from. It's just not that useful when it's one part of the equation that if you're looking at it in a vacuum, it doesn't really tell you much. So if you're just looking at IBUs, the classic example with an imperial stout that's 80 IBUs, but no one describes that as tasting hoppy like a 80 IBU IPA, and so it's not a very useful stat, but we still include it on our beer menus just because I think tradition of people used to looking at that, and I guess there are people out there that are still looking for IBU numbers, but I think the trend overall with brewers and with IPAs, and that obviously that's seen more in hazies and the zero IBU IPAs or whatever that some people are making, is that people want less. Like they almost look at IBU as a high IBU as a negative now when it used to be a positive. So we've come full circle in that respect. I typically like to include it just so people can kind of judge for themselves.
Okay. So I know you're not taking the photographic evidence every year to remind yourself as you head into a new year of what you did previously, but are there creative pursuits that you haven't followed through yet that you'd like to one day when it comes to fresh hops?
I think it's honestly I'm a bit of a dinosaur in some ways, is that I with fresh hop beers, it's kind of my approach is more if it's not broke, then don't fix it. As far as what we're looking more is maybe different styles, incorporating some fresh hops. We wanted to this year. Kind of COVID threw everything into a mix, but we're looking at doing fresh hop ESB with some Willamette or Mount Hood. Moving away from just the IPAs and pale ales, which are, admittedly great showcases for fresh hop beers. But I think that from that perspective, not necessarily a technique driven way in utilizing the fresh hops, but more in a style driven way, and using different varieties in different ways. We'd probably like to go back to do a fresh hop red again here, maybe next year as well. That's always had really great results. Some people think that again, that fresh hop, multi-year fresh hop beers don't work. Though in Oregon the last few years, there's been a number of really good fresh hop Oktoberfests that people are making, which is kind of combines both beer seasons into one.
Yeah, yeah. Is there a pumpkin spiced rim around there just for the trifecta, for the hat trick?
Yeah, not that I've seen.
You can have that idea if you want. You can patent that and put it on in the tap room. I'll just give that one to you free of charge.
So I think that with those kind of multi-year fresh hop beers or anything, you can there's lots of room to experiment as far as like different styles and different hops. We're seeing more of those. I think I've seen sour fresh hop beers. I'm seeing more fresh hop lagers, and so as there's just a greater amount of variety out there style wise, which I think is great, because I think that overall the beer world could use a little more style diversity than what we've seen in kind of the last few years. So if that can kind of start with fresh hop beers and then move to the rest of the year too, I think that would be great, because that may be a way to get to sell that ESB year round would be if people get reintroduced to it by having a fresh hop version. So
cool. Well, a lot to think about here, and I think that's a good place to leave it for now. But I hope we can continue this conversation over fresh hop pints next year when I make it out there. But
so you've already planned your trip then?
Pandemic willing, I will. I'll be there. So
well then maybe you will finally be able to understand kind of this unexplainable flavor component, and just have a sense of what it really means, because I don't know how to stress that enough, that it's just something that has to be experienced to really be understood.
Well, hopefully you'll do a tasting with me, and we'll talk through it. But Zach,
Absolutely, you're welcome anytime, John.
yeah, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
That's Zach Beckwith of Ben Brewing Company in Oregon. If you're near his brewery, you've likely already been by for pints and are planning on more, and if not, you're like me and planning a visit for next year. Either way, it's nice to know there's something to look forward to. And make sure you check out his column on Jeff Allworth's Beervana blog. So who should be on the show? What are you missing in your beer life these days, and what thought is keeping you going? Send me a note at John Hall, that's JOHNHOLL, at beeredge.com, or reach out on Twitter at John_Hall. And don't forget to check out the This Week in Rauch Beer Facebook group, and don't forget to leave a review of this show wherever you download your podcast. Also, check out beeredge.com for more content, to sign up for the newsletter, and to listen to Andy Crouch's podcast. And follow us on social media at The Beer Edge. Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed the logo, and I'm John Hall, now in search for a fresh hop beer. New episodes of this show release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.